Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Talk of truce and ceasefires in Yemen and Syria. Will they last? What kind of morals do U.S. politicians stand for these days? A young woman sets her newborn baby on fire. Now, President Obama says more boots on the ground in Syria. And just what is fracking? How does it work? And why don't people like it? Well, all of this and more coming up in today's news. But first, at a recent Senate Judiciary Committee meeting, Republican Senator Ted Cruz questioned Attorney General Eric Holder over the Constitution. His aim was to see just how far the law allows the government to go when fighting terrorism on American soil.
That's right. Senator Cruz posed the following scenario. If a U.S. citizen sitting on U.S. soil does not pose an immediate threat to life or bodily harm, does the Constitution allow a drone to kill that citizen?
The Attorney General, however, would not give a straightforward answer to the question, saying, quote, "I would not think that would be an appropriate use of any kind of lethal force." Nevertheless, Cruz persisted for an answer, explaining he wasn't concerned what was appropriate, just what the law allows to be done.
That's right. When General Holder continued to ignore the question, Cruz seemed bewildered, remarking to Eric Holder and the committee, saying, "General Holder, I have to tell you, I find it remarkable that in that hypothetical, which is deliberately very simple, you are unable to give a simple one-word, one-syllable answer, no."
Well, moving now to the Middle East. The Yemeni Ansarullah movement says all Yemeni warring parties are ready to lay down their weapons except Saudi Arabia and loyalists of the former government. Now, the spokesman for the Ansarullah, Mohammed Abd al-Salam, says talking about a truce while Saudi Arabia continues its deadly attacks on Yemen will never work. It has no foundation to hold it together. And of course, we know how important starting with a foundation is as a peaceful solution is taught.
That's right. He warned the present round of talks in Kuwait could collapse if Riyadh continues its military actions. The new round of Yemeni peace negotiations brokered by the United Nations just began, however. It has been reported the negotiating teams have failed to reach any agreement so far.
Well, also in the Saudi nation, reports are coming in that Saudi Arabia could continue to produce the same amount of oil as it expands one of its oil fields, resulting in prices of crude oil plunging in the Asian markets. Now, Brent crude delivery has dropped 1% to $44.61 a barrel, and a U.S. benchmark West Texas Intermediate was also at $43.12, which is down 1.5% from a day ago.
The loss has come after a week of strong gains in crude oil prices. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, has been urging the Persian Gulf region to diversify their revenue base to adapt to lower prices.
IMF Director for the Middle East and Central Asia, Masoud Ahmed, explained the situation in a press conference, saying, "Now, 2016 is going to be a continuation of a low oil price environment, so we're going to see a further probably 100 billion or so in terms of lower revenues from oil exports. And this is now beginning to affect not just the financing, but also the economies in terms of their economic activity." And I can imagine $100 billion, that's a lot of money.
It sure is. Iranian leadership says it will continue to support the Syrian government if the ceasefire fails in the Arab country. Ali Akbar Velayati, top advisor to Ayatollah Khomeini, leader of the Islamic Revolution, said in an interview the Syrian government and people would like to see peace and security take hold in their country.
He insisted the Syrians stand ready to defend their territorial integrity and sovereignty against the terrorists and their supporters. UN brokered peace talks between the warring sides began in Syria on April the 13th.
While the UN says a ceasefire still holds, it is on shaky ground. In recent days, the warring parties have accused each other of violating the ceasefire. The world body has urged quick action for the truce to remain in place.
Well, let's turn now to the United States and one man's legacy as a role model shattered by his own choices. No Republican has served as Speaker of the House longer than Dennis Hastert. And during the Clinton and George W. Bush years, he was second in line to the presidency. But in the courtroom this week, Hastert admitted for the first time to being a serial child molester.
Wheelchair-bound, the 74-year-old former Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, appeared in federal court for a public shaming he'd caused. In the courtroom, Hastert finally admitted he had molested boys on the Yorkville High School wrestling team he coached about 40 years ago.
Hastert told the court, "What I did was wrong and I regret it." But Judge Thomas Durkin suggested that remorse was not enough. Judge Durkin stated, "Nothing is more stunning than having serial child molester and Speaker of the House in the same sentence."
Based on what the U.S. Attorney Zachary Farton spoke in a press conference saying, he said Mr. Hastert's legacy and legend are gone, and in its place are a broken, humiliated man. This is as it should be. 6 months ago, Hastert pleaded guilty to violating banking laws by repeatedly making large cash withdrawals. And in 2014, he told FBI he was keeping the money. However, it was really going to one of his victims known as Individual A.
The money was a compensation for his molestation of the young man when he was his wrestling coach. Hastert, lying, said Individual A was blackmailing him. Now, the judge called his claim unconscionable effort to victimize a victim once again. Individual A was 14 years old when the abuse started.
Now, Hastert was forced to face his accusers in the courtroom. First, Scott Cross, now a 53-year-old banker who tearfully recalled lifelong trauma from being abused by his coach at the age of 17. Cross told the court, "It was my darkest secret. I was devastated."
Jolene Burge also testified on behalf of her brother, Stephen Reinbold. He told his sister Hastert had abused him throughout high school. Reinbold died of AIDS in 1995. Mrs. Burge rebuked Hastert, saying, "You were supposed to keep him safe, not violate him."
While one old leader is being publicly humiliated and given a prison sentence, for his misdeeds, another is being celebrated for his courage to marry a much younger man. Former U.S. Senator Harris Wofford, yeah, you heard that correctly, Wofford from Pennsylvania has announced that at 90 years of age and over 20 years after his wife passed away from leukemia, he's planning to get married. This time, however, he will marry a man that is 50 years younger than himself. It seems like society is really kind of supporting and encouraging these types of behaviors.
Wolford revealed the news in Sunday's New York Times op-ed entitled "Finding Love Again, This Time with a Man." He wrote, "I was sure I would never again feel the kind of love Claire and I shared. I assumed that I was too old to seek or expect another romance. 5 years after his wife's death at age 75, he met Matthew Charlton on a beach. At the time, Charlton was 25. Now the two plan to wed 15 years later on April 30th.
Well, we now turn our focus over to Larry McGee, who has our coverage of a mother who murdered her newborn child, as well as stories on the Earth's dying water supply, which we've been bringing a lot on that with the ongoing droughts, and more death lined up in Syria. Larry, what do you have for us?
A 23-year-old mother was sentenced to 30 years this week after confessing to the murder of her newborn child. Mrs. DeVoye is reported to have hidden her pregnancy from her family, and after giving birth, she drove to a secluded location, doused the toddler with fuel, and admittedly set the infant on fire. The child, whom the family later named Angelica, suffered burns over 60% of her body, but was somehow taken to a hospital where she shortly died due to her injuries and smoke inhalation. The mother accepted a plea agreement on the condition that the charges be reduced to aggravated manslaughter for murder, but she must still serve 85% of her sentence before being eligible for parole. In other parental news, parents of children diagnosed with ADHD are being alerted to the benefits of behavioral therapy prior to children being medicated. A new study shows that children who received behavioral therapy first fared better in their progress, and the findings are suspected to have a considerable impact on the way attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is treated. Young Christian Sacklory is being viewed as an example after having been diagnosed with ADHD and even expelled from kindergarten at one point, but he is now showing improvement after his therapist recommended behavioral therapy first as opposed to pharmaceuticals, which are typically selected as the first option. The approach targets pre- and elementary school-aged children and focuses on praising and rewarding positive conduct, such as the children controlling their bodies, being polite, and displaying excellent manners. The study, which highlights the importance of the order of treatment options, is groundbreaking and demonstrates that children who start with behavioral training show better results than those who begin with pharmaceuticals. Speaking of beginnings, India is suffering water crisis, and as hardship sets in, it is beginning to take notice of the accelerated deaths of its reservoirs, lakes, and rivers. Amazingly, however, where water is still available, people are reported to still be practicing carelessness with regard to the precious resource. The managing editor at Down to Earth magazine, Richard Mahapatra, describes the situation as scary, since most of the reservoirs supply many of the cities. To further compound things, the usual dynamics are at work, producing allegations that water is being unfairly distributed between the rich and the poor. The impoverished are now being forced to draw from groundwater blocks, a fourth of which are believed to be incapable of being replenished by monsoons due to overuse. Increasing temperatures are reported to have placed 330 million people at risk, with heat waves plaguing much of India. The plague of war is still scorching the Euphrates region, where President Obama recently approving the deployment of up to 250 military personnel to Syria. The president says that just as he approved additional support for Iraqi forces against ISIS, he's decided to increase U.S. support for local forces fighting ISIS in Syria. The president went on to say that a small amount of American Special Operation Forces are already on the ground in Syria, and their expertise has been critical as local forces have driven ISIS out of key areas. So, given their success, President Obama stated he has approved the deployment of up to 250 personnel in Syria, including special forces, to keep up the momentum. The move is controversial, however, given prior statements by the president, which assures citizens of no boots on the ground. Incredibly, however, the State Department is now denying such statements were ever made, and in light of considerable footage which demonstrates otherwise, reporters are having a field day. State Department spokesperson John Kirby attempted to address the confusion at a recent press briefing, where he was peppered with questions by amazed reporters, one of which inquired as to whether or not the denial was some kind of a devious grand strategy to say one thing and then do the complete opposite. The State Department's reasoning is that special forces are not ground troops in the traditional sense, and so there's therefore no contradiction between the administration's current actions and its previous statements. In the end, the State Department representative stated that there is no point in arguing the point. He is not denying that the U.S. has troops on the ground in Syria and that they are wearing boots. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. It's on, Jeff. Back to you.
Don, I can't get over that first story. You think what possibly could a mother be thinking to set her own child on fire? What confusion in the mind.
Yeah, so much confusion in society right now. It's horrible.
Well, Pope Francis is once again making an appeal for peace in Syria after failed attempts at the Geneva talks. He said only a political solution will be able to guarantee a future of reconciliation and peace in that beloved and martyred country, which I invite you to pray a lot. Also now, let's pray together, he said, to the Blessed Mary for beloved Syria.
Interesting. Well, years ago, a nuclear leak was discovered at a nuclear waste facility. Today, that leak has expanded, of course, over a period of time. Part of the Manhattan Project in 1943, Washington State's Hanford site houses 53 million gallons of toxic radioactive material. Yeah, that's a lot. This once secret site where plutonium was produced to use in the world's first nuclear weapon, which was the Fat Man bomb that was detonated over Nagasaki in 1945, a bomb which, of course, set the stage for the future of warfare.
Well, 73 years later, experts say it's time for the American public to worry. The leak was discovered in 2011 by a worker that came across a double-shelled tank called AY-102 that was leaking fluid. Now, when the Hanford site was built in the 1940s, they began building underground storage tanks. That went on until the 1970s. 149 of those were single-shelled tanks. When the worker discovered the tank in 2011 and reported it, he was ignored.
That's right. The site has actually produced enough plutonium, to create over 60,000 nuclear bombs. Now, that's a lot. In the early 2000s, they began moving the nuclear material from those single-shelled tanks, which they were building through the 40s and the 70s, to double-shelled tanks. Well, the one in question, which is AY-102, was one of the first of these double-shelled tanks to show signs of leaking.
From one disaster to another, hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking, a process used to extract natural gas from underground, is creating some environmental consequences. In this informative video, pay attention to the process and its effects on the environment.
What is hydraulic fracturing, or fracking? Since the Industrial Revolution, our energy consumption has risen unceasingly. The majority of this energy consumption is supplied by fossil fuels like coal or natural gas. Recently, there's been a lot of talk about a controversial method of extracting natural gas, hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. Put simply, fracking describes the recovery of natural gas from deep layers inside the earth. In this method, porous rock is fractured by the use of water, sand, and chemicals in order to release the enclosed natural gas. The technique of fracking has been known since the 1940s. The technique of fracking has been known since the 1940s. The technique of fracking has been known since the 1940s. Nonetheless, only in the last 10 years has there been quite a fracking boom, especially in the USA. This is because most conventional natural gas sources in America and on the European continent have been exhausted. Thus, prices for natural gas and other fuels are rising steadily. Significantly more complicated and expensive methods, like fracking, have now become attractive and profitable. In the meantime, fracking has already been used more than 1 million times in the USA alone. Over 60% of all new oil and gas wells are drilled by using fracking. Now, let's take a look at how fracking actually works. First, a shaft is drilled several hundred meters into the earth. From there, a horizontal hole is drilled into the gas-bearing layer of rock. Next, the fracking fluid is pumped into the ground using high-performance pumps. On average, the fluid consists of 8 million liters of water, which amounts to about the daily consumption of 65,000 people, plus several thousand tons of sand and about 200,000 liters of chemicals. The mixture penetrates into the rock layer and produces innumerable tiny cracks. The sand prevents the cracks from closing again, The chemicals perform various tasks. Among other things, they compress the water, kill off bacteria, or dissolve minerals. Next, the majority of the fracking fluid is pumped out again. And now the natural gas can be recovered. As soon as the gas source is exhausted, the drill hole is sealed. As a rule, the fracking fluid is pumped back into deep underground layers and sealed in there. However, fracking is also associated with several considerable risks. The primary risk consists in the contamination of drinking water sources. Fracking not only consumes large quantities of fresh water, but in addition the water is subsequently contaminated and is highly toxic. The contamination is so severe that the water cannot even be cleaned in a treatment plant. Even though the danger is known and theoretically could be managed, in the USA already sources have been contaminated due to negligence. No one yet knows how the enclosed water will behave in the future, since there have not yet been any long-term studies on the subject. The chemicals used in fracking vary from the hazardous to the extremely toxic and carcinogenic, such as benzol or formic acid. The companies using fracking say nothing about the precise composition of the chemical mixture. But it is known that there are about 700 different chemical agents which can be used in the process.
A lot goes into extracting natural gas. Well, a Green Party politician in Australia has more on the matter of fracking. He was actually able to, now get this, set fire to the surface of water. He was actually able to ignite that river there, the one in question, which is the Codamine River, and he says that this is pollution as a result of fracking from a nearby drilling facility along that stretch of river. Well, flames from the ignition lasted for over an hour, and hundreds of fracking wells are located within mere kilometers from the river. Fracking companies say the river is flammable due to leaking methane caused by other mining facilities in the area.
Jeremy Buckingham said there's enormous concern about fracking in the area as farmers have contacted him about the Codamine River bubbling in what he once said was a small amount of bubbles, which has now turned into enormous bubbles boiling in the river. Now, the company that operates in that area, or Origin Energy, said that the gas is seeping to the surface due to the natural causes, and a promotional video posted online says that safety is their top concern.
Interesting. Buckingham said that this gas is leaking out of the ground because of the fracking from the hundreds of gas wells around the country, and the company, at Origin Energy, should be condemned and held responsible because of its practices.
Another woman demonstrated by holding a standard kitchen match to her faucet that the water and gases coming out of her faucet were flammable. She said that the company that has been drilling for natural gas showed an increase in methane gas in the groundwater. She was able actually to light it on fire. It kept bursting up there as she held the match to it.
It's amazing. Shale and natural gas fracking is booming in Texas, and of course it has raised concerns for air quality and public safety. A study done by the Weather Channel, the Center for Public Integrity, and Inside Climate News took a look at the drilling taking place in an area called the Eagle Ford Shale Play. They studied and examined almost 300 health complaints in the region that are potentially linked to fracking.
And lastly, how would you like if a big company entered your land, sunk a gas well without your permission, and threatened your livelihood, all with the consent and approval of the government? Well, this again is causing gas to spew out from water wells. Natural gas is Australia's new gold, and prospectors from all over are coming to stake their claim. But at what cost to human health and the environment? Organizations are asking the tough questions that oil and gas companies don't want asked.
Well, it's easy to see the world is continuing to spiral into total confusion, and that confusion is causing more and more harm to not only mankind, but the environment as well. If only they could return to a set of rules that doesn't bring harm to themselves, others, or the environment, well, then we could actually achieve the peace, joy, and the abundant living for all people. Now, Yisrael Hawkins and the House of Yahweh has the peaceful solution to solve your problems. To find out more, you can contact the House of Yahweh, and when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our latest website at www.ypnnews.com. Now, for any emails, you can send those to info@yahweh.com. And for any calls coming from outside the United States, please call the number on your screen now. And once again, don't forget the latest and greatest Bible study tool on the market today, the Yisrael Says program. You can find more by going to www.yisraelsays.com and look at this study tool that now includes the Book of Yahweh as part of its searches.
Well, don't go anywhere. Grab your pencil, paper, and your Holy Scriptures, because up next is Yisrael Hawkins bringing clarity in a world full of confusion. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.